Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Dr. Denisha Keating Show. I am so excited to have you here. I have Bambi with me as well. This podcast is designed as a kitchen table conversation where we're sitting down between two friends to talk about a topic and ask questions. One of the rules that I have is that we cannot yell at each other, talk over each other, or make faces to what the other person is saying. What we do is we ask questions. Why? Because we want to really understand where the other person is coming from. And the best part is we are inviting you to be the fly on the wall to come and listen to how we would navigate a conversation like this. So today we're going to be talking about trauma and our stories and how I love how Bambi put it is that it's not the death sentence for us. So I'm going to have you take it away, Bambi. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be taking some notes, and then we're going to jump into some questions that I have. Go ahead and take it off.
Well, I am so excited to be on this. And one of the reasons why is because I have spent 17 years I worked for the United States Census Bureau, and then I worked for Nielsen TV ratings. And what I did is that I was in people's homes for the last 17 years having table talk. That they were part of a survey, and in them being part of a survey, I got to sit at their tables. So I love, the table talk because that's what transformed me, being in all these people's homes for those 17 years. And hearing stories and getting rid of your preconceived ideas on how you think something's going to be. So I'm excited. Just like you said, yes, my name is Bambi. I am an author, a 2-time published author, and another book is on its way. I am a mother of 6 adult children, and I have 13 grandchildren and counting. And I have a story, to be able to share on your podcast. So I'm excited.
I'm excited. So go ahead and just start with your story. What, you said you have 6 kids. 6 kids, right? Okay. I was like, did I make that up in my head? 6 kids.
Sometimes I think I did.
I know I'm one of 11 kids. So, and I've raised 5 of my siblings. So it definitely is sometimes where I sit back, I'm like, wow, I have a story. And I love that you said like, I have a story and I want to hear your story. What is it that you have had to overcome, and when did you realize that it wasn't the thing that was going to break you, especially into silence?
Yeah. Well, just like you said, before we got on live, I did say my trauma is not a death sentence, and I think that sometimes we get caught up in our trauma and we have our trauma define us, but all our trauma is for us to be able to use those lessons. I sell a t-shirt that says my story, your first aid kit, because that's what it's meant for. It's, all of us have trauma. All of us have scars. We're not leaving this world without any of them.
Right.
It's what we do with that trauma. It's how we allow that trauma to either paralyze us or we allow that trauma to help us to fly like the butterfly. It's our choice. And sometimes, for years, I chose to be best friends with my trauma. Because I chose that to be my identity. I chose that when I walked into the room, we were going to get to talk about my trauma, and it was going to fill my dopamine. It was going to be able to fill, me being the center of attention, because some of my trauma is based on the fact that I always felt invisible. I always felt that nobody saw me. Nobody cared to see me. And so when I got older and I started speaking about my trauma, I then started being the center of attention. And then there comes a point in your life, my life, I'm not going to say everybody's, and I wish that it was everybody's life, but there comes a point that you're getting sick and tired of being the center of everybody's and then them walking away from you because they really don't want to hear you again. You get tired of being the elephant in the room. You get tired of being the one that everybody talks about. And after a while, that elephant in the room, I had to begin to realize that the elephant in the room was part of my trauma, but getting rid of that elephant, getting rid of that I'm the victim of domestic violence, that I tried to commit suicide 3 different times, that I came from a very dysfunctional, broken home, raised by a single mom, a father that was a brutal alcoholic. I had been molested. I've been married to men that I was a victim of domestic violence, just like said. I was married to a man that decided cheating on me was the way to go. So those are part of my story. That is part of my trauma. And that's part of the elephant in the room. But then after a while, that elephant in the room didn't serve me anymore.
Right.
But
Right.
finally getting rid of that elephant in the room and bringing my elephant in the room
Mm.
began to serve me and began to transform me and began to take me on a journey that, just like I said, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I started crawling myself out of that
Mm.
pit. I started crawling myself out of me being woe is me. I started
Mm.
crawling myself out of that pit and saying, you know what? I'm no different than a lot of women.
Mm.
We all have gone through some stuff. I'm not the only woman that is the victim of domestic violence in the church.
Right.
Not the only woman that tried to commit suicide and felt like her life didn't matter.
Yeah. So, can I ask a couple questions? Because I think there's a
Absolutely.
lot here to unpack. And I do a lot of public speaking within the foster care community. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there is a lot of us who. I want to ask questions, but I want to phrase it in this way. There's a lot of us who kind of come in with like, we understand that other people have gone through what we have gone through. But I do think that there are moments when we're like, oh, that person gets to share their story. And now my story is not validated. And you
Mm.
said something where you said there is a dopamine push to share your story. Can you explain what that looks like and how well it looked like for you and what you mean by that?
I, you know what I mean by that? It's that because everybody wants to hear trauma. It's like we're in churches or we're in organizations or we're in places that we pick the worst. We pick the worst thing that has happened to as you're in the foster care system, we pick the worst person, the worst child, the worst situation to be able to talk about because it feeds on our emotion. And it also gives us more, which is so sad when you're talking about this. It also gives more donations.
Yeah.
It also gives more effects of what is really happening when sometimes that is, and I'm not, and there definitely is foster care and the foster care system, and there is definitely people within the foster care system that shouldn't be a foster parent. I get that when you're just
Mm-hmm.
saying about foster parenting, but the majority really love what they're doing. I was a foster care parent. I was part of
Mm-hmm.
respite. I was also in the foster care system for a short period of time. And my foster care parents loved me unconditionally. And I didn't know what to do with that love because I had been
Mm-hmm.
broken so much in my own life.
Mm-hmm.
But those stories don't sell.
Right, right.
If
Well,
that makes sense if
it
that makes
does.
sense what I'm saying.
So, just so someone who might be listening to be like, what do you mean? So, like, you'll go to a charity event, and what they'll do is that, like, literally, like, I've been asked to be a speaker at a couple of things, and there has been times where someone will tell me that my voice is expired, and it has made me feel like, and just so people know, I don't go in sharing the worst part of my stories, but there have been people who have said, Denisha, can you talk about how, I want to know the worst of the worst because we need to move their hearts so that they make change. And that feels very icky to me because
Mm-hmm.
what I'm doing is not, yes, I understand you want to raise a dollar bill, but but there are people in the room who have experienced trauma, and so when I now do speaking events, I don't dig into the details of my abuse or what happened to me because I feel first off like there is going to be someone in that room who's going to hear it and relive their own trauma, and maybe
Yes.
they're not equipped to handle the spiral. So I have not done that, and that has made people not bring me in, and I'm okay with that because honestly, like,
Yeah.
that is the part of my speaking that I'm not going to go in and share parts of my story I don't want to share. But I
Yes.
do think that I have seen time and time again is that when I was in the beginning stages of sharing my story, where I think I've gotten that dopamine rush, is that I was validated in someone saying, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I did good because I got that reaction. And it
Absolutely.
does give us that like high. But then days later, it's like, why do I feel dirty and gross and violated? Why do I feel
Yes.
weird when someone approached me after and said, hey, I'm sorry that happened to you, and like almost like a trauma bonding, but it was like usually from the opposite gender, and usually like I just felt like, oh my god, like they know too much, and
Yes.
like it made me feel really gross at the end of the day.
Yeah.
um and that's something I didn't expect. And I remember the first time that I got a check because I did that. And I went in and I told like very little detail, but enough detail to where when I got that check, I actually felt very like I had sold out kind of feeling. And I think that really um, there it isn't that people when you misuse people's stories and say like you need to tell the worst parts of you so that way they really what they verbalize it isn't so that they sell to donate, but it is to so that they are understanding what it really is like. Now we can be honest and upfront about that stuff, and I think we should be, but there's a
Yes,
time and a place. And so you
absolutely.
said that you were walking into rooms, and this is what kind of got like went, ooh, interesting. You were walking into rooms telling the worst parts of your story to get someone to say, I'm so sorry. So what made you kind of go, oh, I don't like this and I'm not going to do this anymore?
I just think that it's a revelation. I just think that it's
Mm,
evolving. It's not something that I woke up and all of a sudden I did it. I remember
right.
when my first book came, at my door, and I able to spend the time and I read the whole night my story. And
Mm,
I closed my book and I said, "Oh my goodness, God, I'm not that same person anymore."
yeah.
But now I want to go, my mission is that I want to go find that woman, and I want her to have the bravery and the courage to be able to tell her story.
Mm,
Because the story, you have to tell your story until your story doesn't affect you anymore. You
mm-hmm.
have to tell your story until your story doesn't bring the ickiness anymore. And I'm not saying that, and this was the first time in my book called The Journey of Josephine that I really shared a lot of my story that I never shared before. But
Mm-hmm.
I wanted people to know how far I had come and how
Right, right.
far that I had been broken and how far that I have come to be put back together again.
Okay, so you shared each thing with a purpose,
Yes.
but not to be like, okay, now you need to like, okay, I've seen this happen for a few people I've talked to who have said like they were working with a publisher and they were like, you have to like, in order to make this book different than what's out there, you have to tell us never before like never
Yeah.
before stated things so that way you can like market that. So you're saying that's not, you didn't play into that, you didn't play
No.
into just wanting a book sale. You were like, anything that I'm sharing here is to show where I was, where I've kind of struggled through, and where I ended up.
And
So
where I
it
am
was with a
today.
purpose. Okay.
Absolutely. And, and because it had been since I was like 25 years old, I had
Mm,
all intentions of always wanting to write a book. I had a seventh grade teacher that told me that I had a gift of storytelling and that
mm,
someday I was going to write a book and that I was going to be an author to represent our school. Had no
mm,
idea what that meant. I
right.
came from a broken home. We didn't talk that way,
Mm-mm. Right.
40 years
Yeah.
ago. It just wasn't part of our conversation and our logo. But it took me so long to be able to write my story
Right.
because I wanted to make sure that there was no ickiness to my story. There was a story and people were like, whoa. And they said that, they read my story and they're like, oh my goodness, I can't breathe through the story
Right.
because it's like one thing after another. And I
Yeah.
didn't veer off.
Right.
I just told the facts, told the story, and then I told what God did in my life and how he transformed
Mm,
me and how he took all those broken pieces of my life and all the burnt ashes and he made something beautiful.
yeah.
I didn't, because to me, the story isn't what happened to me. The
The story
story
is the
is what
redemption.
I have become.
Yeah.
Eve,
Mm,
I could have been something totally different. I was a single mom with 6 children and I had 2 sons, identical twin boys, and I was bound and determined that they were not going to be a statistic. My boys could have
right.
been a statistic. They could have been the people that
Mm,
were out on the streets, in the drugs, into the gangs and things
right.
like that. But I chose that my children were not going to be a statistic, that I was going to be that kind of mom in the midst of us me being a single mom. My children weren't going to be a statistic.
Yeah.
And I worked really hard and intentionally to be that kind of mom that I could raise children that could do great, in our
Right.
society today. Sometimes being a victim works for people.
Yeah. And
It works. But then after a while, they're not seeing that people are walking away. I was seeing people not wanting to put up with that. And
Yeah.
I have some of the closest, dearest friends. And I was just on the conversation with one of them yesterday, and I was just saying, they gave me 10 minutes. After a while, they're like, Bambi, you got 10 minutes. You got 10 minutes to, scream, yell, do whatever you need to do. But after that 10 minutes, then we're going to tell you the truth. And they were friends that when I was sick, they
Right.
knew that I was acting. I would be sick for
Right.
2 days, and
Right.
they knew that the third day that I really didn't need them to come over for soup anymore, but I still pretended because I needed that.
Yeah.
They knew that I did that. But because I spent my whole life feeling like that I was invisible, I now had to spend my life saying, no, I'm seen. And
So
they were willing to
you
go on that journey with me.
Yeah. So even your friends could tell when you were seeking attention
Absolutely.
versus knowing your worth in a way. And when
Yes.
I find like, and maybe I'm off base here, but I find that sometimes when I am feeling that invisibleness, I do things to put like myself out there to seek attention.
Hmm.
So it might be like texting someone and then they're like, hey, what's up? And it's like, oh, nothing. I just feel really gross today. Instead of just being like normal conversation, like my only intent of texting them or posting something was to get attention. And it feels different, like on this side of, healing.
Hmm.
Recently, I wrote my third book and it's called, taking my voice back, healing what broke me. And a part of where I started to realize I was hurt was that like the only times people would talk to me was when they wanted something. And that
Mm.
was really, really hard because it was like, I value our friendship more than just me purchasing stuff from your business, or like only when you want to talk to me is when you're having a hard day. Like friendships need to go both ways. But then when I needed a friend and said like, hey, I'm having anxiety today and I just need to have a conversation. I just need to sit with someone and kind of work this out. There was silence on the other end. But I
Mm.
had recognized that some of the friendships I had built were based on that. Like it was only like, hey, we only text each other when we want something. And that could be as little as like being heard. But what you're saying is like your friends started to notice that and be like, hey, you have 10 minutes. And then we're going to kind of move on from this because now we're noticing that you're okay. We know
Yes.
you're good. This isn't where you're in your depths. This isn't the Job moment where Job really
Right.
needs someone to sit with him, but it's more of they know that you're good, but you're doing this to get the
Yes.
validation that you're good. Like you're
And
seen, that
they're
we love
even
you.
Absolutely. And they are even today because they now know that, because now my friends, even though they've heard the stories, and I had one of my dear friends, she said, you know what, Bambi, I've heard these stories for the last 25 years, but to
Mm,
read your book for the first time and see it in order, like this was my friend, this little girl that's
mm,
that you're talking about, this is my friend. And
yeah,
she said, it really hit her in a hard way, even though she knew a lot of my story, because it's, that's what friendships do. We
yeah.
talk. And, yesterday was I decided that this year, I had lost my job in the late part of October. And I decided that I
Mm,
was going to take some of my 401k and I was going to live this year building a platform, finding places that I can speak, finding
mm-hmm.
platforms that I can share my story and things like that. And, it's only January,
Right,
but
right.
I'm talking to her and I'm going, it's January and this isn't going anywhere. I'm
Mm.
afraid and I'm a failure. And she's like, a
You just
failure? Where
started.
did you get the word failure from?
Right, right.
It's January, Bambi. And so she said, you know what, Bambi, what I want you to do is that I want you to look up the word failure. And then I want
Mm,
to see if you fit that definition.
right.
And you're
And you
like,
know, yeah.
I get off the phone and I'm like, oh my goodness. She's like, you've written 3 books.
Yeah.
You have like I have a 10th grade education. I had a
Mm,
teenage pregnancy. I had a 10th grade
mm,
education, got my GED. I had a teenage pregnancy. I've raised 6 kids, homeschooled all of them for 27 years, homeschooled
right.
all of them until they reached adulthood. I'm a great storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
I've done all these things, but yet, because it's only January, I'm thinking I failed.
Right,
But
right,
some of
right.
that is trauma, the residue. We
Yeah.
all carry around the residue you need friends in your life. They're going to say, okay, that's residue. Let's deal with it and let's move
Yeah.
on.
And that's so powerful because I think that sometimes what we do is we do say, well, I have trauma and so it can't be good. I will not get this. Like we use our trauma to stay where we're at. And that's where you were saying like being the victim. Like we look at it and we're like, well, we're just the victim. Nobody likes us. No one wants to give us a chance versus just saying, hey, what wound is this hitting? Why is this
Mm-hmm.
hitting me so hard? Why is this causing me to be emotional? Why do I feel like I have failed when I haven't? And I follow a couple people because I do run my own business and I do a lot of coaching and like just loving on people wherever they're kind of at. And one of the biggest things that I've always asked my clients is, why are you feeling like it's a failing moment? Like you haven't quit. And even when you were to say, nope, that's no longer for me, that's no longer the direction, that doesn't mean you fail. But
Right.
why do you feel this? And it always comes back to something that they were told, like, you're never going to make it. I don't know why you're trying. And so we have this opportunity to, like you said, pick up the victim card or say, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? I just need more time. I just need to
Yes.
keep trying. Right now, it's not working, but it doesn't mean that it won't. And that I think is such a reprieve for me emotionally sometimes when I'm like, hey, I'm allowed to have a bad day. That doesn't necessarily mean it's my trauma today or from last year.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's just that I'm having a normal moment like everybody else. But I do see a world of people who are like, you get to be the victim. And you have a foster care background, so I'm sure you've heard this a few times. Is that I've heard it a lot where people are like, yeah, but if you gave up, Denisha, we would have understood. And I was like, funny. No, you would not have. Like, the only reason why you're comfortable telling me that today is because I have a PhD or because I have a good, successful business. But if I let that mentality hit me, you would have been the person by me saying, hey, don't let this drag you down. And that
Absolutely.
is what we need. And you're saying, like, I needed my friends to say, hey, what like, there's some residue. So this is not where you've actually been. You have all of these successes, but how is this different from the woe is me mentality to a natural bump from the trauma?
Because you just learn to get up on your horse. You learn to realize, I went skydiving when I was 49 years old. Before I turned 50, my friends said, hey, why don't you do something, out of the ordinary? They wanted me to
Mm-hmm.
get a tattoo. And I said, no, no tattoo. So I decided to go
Mm-hmm.
skydiving. And when you go skydiving, I think skydiving is such a great definition of life.
Mm-hmm.
Is you get all harnessed up, you're kind of cocky, you're like, oh, I can do this, I'm going to be better than my parents, I'm going to do this better than my dad did, and I'm going to, life, we just think life is going to be, we're going to do it a whole lot better than anybody else. And then we
Mm-hmm.
get all harnessed up and we get into this plane, you go 17,000 feet, then you get a tatum stuck on the back of you, like you got this weight stuck on you, tells you to move forward to the open, to the open window, the open door, I mean. And then they don't count because they're not going to count, because then you're going to put your hands, across the wall. So they just let you sit there for a minute until they're ready to just push you.
Mm-hmm.
Such a definition of life. And then you're going down. It takes about 7 minutes from you to go from the plane down to the ground. And then they tell
Mm-hmm.
you when you get down to the ground, don't land on your feet, don't land on your knees. You need to land on your ass. Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
such an amazing definition of life? Is
Yeah.
that we land continually on our butt, and there's no respecter of person. I've been into multi-million dollar homes that the woman is crying to me like in a fetal position like a baby, but owns a $6.2 million home.
Mm-hmm.
To going into the projects of Detroit, and having this woman have everything together, but she's got roaches crawling all over her wall.
Right.
There's no respecter of trauma. I mean, we've learned that even in the California fires right now.
Right.
All the people, the actors that have lost their, $45 million home, fire
Mm-hmm.
didn't say, oh my goodness, this person lives there, so we can't touch this. Oh, this person lives there, so we can touch this.
Mm-hmm.
Life is life. And I think that once I got that in my brain, that I'm no different. I'm no different than so many other people. I just choose to, when somebody asked me on a podcast I was on, what is your superhero power? And I said, vulnerability. I just chose to be vulnerable. I just chose to be honest. I just chose to be the person in the room that wasn't going to hide my crap anymore. I
Okay.
just chose the person in the room that says, hey guys, let's open up my closet and let all the skeletons fall out. It was just a choice. It wasn't that I did anything spectacular. It was just a choice that I just didn't want to live that way anymore.
Okay, so I was having a hard time tracking because I was like, "What does this mean?" But I think I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. So you're saying with validation, you're walking in the room to say that basically someone could look at you and be like, "You're the only one who's ever gone through this." But when you stop living for that and you start just being like, "Hey, life is life, and it could happen to anybody." You
Absolutely.
are actually willing to say, here's my stuff, but you're also listening to other people. Am I hearing that correctly?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Because
And just
I,
allowing
yeah,
them, because the moment that you become vulnerable, the whole room becomes vulnerable.
yeah,
The moment that
yeah.
then you say, oh my goodness, I've done this. Parenting. You look at, I homeschooled my kids for all
Hmm.
these years. Now, some parents go, oh my goodness, I could never do it. I couldn't do it either. Do you think
Right.
that I did it perfectly? You really think that I didn't have times that I pulled my daughter's hair because she aggravated me? Like,
Mm,
do you really think? But the problem is that nobody wants to admit those things. Nobody wants to admit anything. So then when the person comes into the room that says they have a story, they're like, oh. But if I give people the ability to be vulnerable and to say, I know I'm not the only one in this room, and then they feel safe. But if I came in as a victim, they don't want to be a victim alongside of me.
what does that look like in a conversation?
In a conversation, if I became the victim, a lot of times the other person beside me, like let's just say for parenting, if I chose to not tell you anything about how hard parenting is, the person next to me is not going to tell me either. But if I choose to say, oh my goodness, I had such a bad day and you won't believe what I did. And I'm not condoning this. So please don't think that I'm condoning it. But when my daughter was 5 years old, we're counting nickels. One day she could count by fives incredibly. The next day, that little girl of mine had no idea how to count to five. No idea. So she had long hair, and I remember yanking her hair, going, I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you did this. Now, to tell people that inside of a circle, they're all thinking, oh my goodness, I would never tell anybody that. What are they going to think about me? What kind of mother are they going to think that I am? As they just yelled and screamed at their child in the morning. But if I come in and honest and say, hey guys, I had a really bad day and this is what I did. It gives them also the freedom and the vulnerability to say, oh my goodness, thank you for sharing this because this was my morning. But we
And
live with such a facade.
I think that I'm having a hard time understanding the difference because and this might be also for someone listening is, difference between maybe trauma dumping and being vulnerable. Now, yes, when I hear that like, oh, you pulled your daughter's hair, it's like I would not do that. But like you said, like, well, maybe somebody yelled. Now you're not now I'm want to make sure I'm understanding is that you're
Right.
you're not saying, oh, I pulled her hair just so that everybody else can be vulnerable with me and basically like no one called me out on it. But what is the difference between actually like coming in with a victim mindset to talk about it
Mhm.
because I could share that and pretend to be the victim and then coming in from a vulnerability standpoint, what's the difference between those two?
I would say the difference in that vulnerability is that I was willing to open up and then say, okay, now where do we go with this? Not
Okay.
just not looking at it and going, oh, my past made me do this. It was
Okay.
me coming in and saying, okay, I just acted like a 2-year old in front of my daughter. Now what do I do with this?
Hmm.
And stop making it all the time. We constantly try to make it, oh, my dad was an alcoholic and he treated me this way. So now I'm going to do that. There was no excuses for my
Okay.
behavior.
Hmm.
There was more, hey guys, let's be honest here. Homeschooling isn't like the easiest thing in
Yeah.
the world. It is the hardest thing. And here I'm willing to be vulnerable enough to tell you, to also make me accountable and also to make my children, look at me and being accountable to me. So it's not about being a
Yeah.
victim. It's about being vulnerable enough that that person doesn't have to hide, that they're
Yeah.
struggling.
Yeah. And I'm what I'm hearing too is the difference between, because my mom used to do that just to get it out. So that way, she'd be like, but I told you, kind of situation.
Yes.
Which is not good. That's more of a victim mentality, because it was about like, look how hard my day was. That's what I'm hearing is the difference is like, look how hard my day was. And I'm only saying this to get someone to maybe gasp or be like, we're so sorry that your day was hard. That's more victim mindset.
Yes.
Vulnerability is, I made a mistake and I don't know what to do to fix it. And I need to be vulnerable because I need accountability. I need someone
Absolutely.
to like tell me I'm not alone in this, but also like I want to know what else to do instead of that. I want to be better. I don't want to just point the finger to my past and be like, well, my parents did it to me. Like you really want it to be like, I'm gonna say the ugly thing that I did so that I am not sitting in it just doing it again. Like I would never want to do
Right.
that again, but I need people to tell me what I can do and that I'm not alone. So it's
Yes.
different. Vulnerability is different than victim mindset. And that,
Absolutely.
okay, so I'm hearing the differences between the two now.
Yes.
Again,
And
victim mindset
and
would be the
because
pointing the blame.
we know some of what's going on in people's homes,
Mm-hmm.
but they won't talk about it until
Mm-hmm.
somebody else can say, I just screwed up.
And
And
your
it
hope by sharing would be that people would understand if they don't see it as wrong, is like, oh, this is not something I should be doing. Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. I see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's hard because you're right. It is hard to be vulnerable, but I also have seen people twist this in a bad way to fake vulnerability to get the room
Yes.
to go deeper. So they tell you all the trauma stuff. So that way, then it's like, okay, now everyone go around and you feel the vulnerability and you're going to go as deep as the person who goes before you. But there is an authenticity and vulnerability that you can tell. Is someone doing this just to get me to cry and share and be vulnerable with them? So you got to be careful with what you share. Or
Absolutely.
are they telling it because it really is weighing on their heart? And I think we see that in the way that someone's vulnerable. This is clearly decades after it happened, so you're not like filled with the guilt and the shame of it, but I'm
Right.
sure in that moment when you were there, you're like, guys, I made a mistake, and like you were like overwhelmed with emotions
Absolutely.
and hopefully met with grace and like, okay,
Yeah.
I've been there too. This is what we do. This is how we don't do that. Like if you're feeling angry, get up and walk away. Like you have to remember she's 5. But I think you said it. I'm not sure. Maybe I heard it like undertone of it, but we're not here to build perfection. Like we're here to be honest with people, and like
Absolutely.
perfectionism doesn't exist. So it's like that's why the failure mindset I think can come up is like, well, I didn't get it right away. And it's
Yes.
like, well, no, life be lifing, and life hits us on our butts, and it's true. But it is something that I think when you're leading with like that victim, maybe, and some people might get upset about that, but like leading with the victim, I want to be heard mindset also is a big
Mhm.
thing, where it's like, I need you to hear my story because I've never been heard before, versus
Yes.
I'm sharing so that other people don't have to go through this, or know that they're not alone in what they're
Yes.
experiencing. So
And
if
it really
you go
depends
ahead.
on your audience. It definitely
Yes.
depends on your audience,
Yeah.
because there are
Yeah.
times that you need to share. I think that, people do, you do need to share until it doesn't affect you anymore and until you're really, really ready to make some change. But I also look at, the difference between like my parenting and my mom's parenting. I
Mm-hmm.
felt that I was going to be such a better parent, than my mom. So I set out, that, my children were going to make sure that they were invincible. They were going to be noticed. They were going to,
Mm-hmm.
be valued. They were going to be hugged and they were going to be validated, because I was going to be so different than my mom. And, my children are all adults, they're
Mm-hmm.
all raising their own children now. And, we sit around at Thanksgiving. So just remember, if you have children, you're going to have stories at Thanksgiving. And
Oh
they're
yeah,
like, but
always.
mom, you really were a tough person. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like everything was based on a performance with you. You tried
Mm.
so hard to make
They
sure
called you out.
that we didn't suffer from anything. And in my heart, I'm
Yeah.
like, what are you talking about? I just wanted you to be noticed in a room. I just wanted you never to feel how I felt.
Right. Right.
So my mother did damage one way. And as a
Right.
mom, I did damage another way.
Yeah.
So as parents, I just hope that we learn to have grace for all
Right.
generations. I'm not saying that
Right.
we excuse behavior, but I'm saying we don't have enough grace from generation to generation because every
Yeah.
generation is going to do it better.
Yeah.
But then every generation also has children that think that you didn't do it better.
Yeah.
And that's a hard lesson. And
Yeah.
to realize that as a mom for me, that even though they were single, I was a single parent for a lot of their lives. I tried to do
Mm.
everything,
Mm.
so they didn't have the pain and the agony of, what I went through as a child. To know that there are 6 different stories within inside of your household, there are 6 different perspectives, and some of your
Mm.
children, you are a villain, and some of your children, you are a hero until they work
Mm.
through their own stories.
Yeah.
And that's tough as a
Yeah.
mom.
So one of the things you said, and I want to go back to before we go up into like finishing off with that last one, is that you said like sometimes we have to share our stories until it doesn't impact us anymore. What is the caution that you would give someone who is always wanting to share it from a stage or like a podcast? Like, what would be like, do you have any rules about sharing your story until it doesn't hurt anymore? Because I think I'll have you answer and then I'll answer what my head goes through when I think of that.
Yeah, and there are some podcasts. I have been on like over 140 podcasts, and there are
Mm-hmm.
some that want to immediately go to the meat of that.
Mm-hmm.
They immediately want to get to, oh, what really happened, and
Mm-hmm.
I've learned to pass over it. Like I'll share it,
Mm-hmm.
but I just learned to pass over it to get to the part where I've been transformed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because people want to hear your story. And I think that you should, because sometimes my friends will tell me they'll listen to a podcast and stuff. Like, man, Bambi, sometimes I think you need to share a little bit more because you are already so far on the other side that sometimes people are wondering, oh my goodness, could I ever get there?
Right,
That
right, right.
sometimes you need to share it a little bit more than what I do.
Yeah. So when I think of like sharing it till it doesn't hit you, I always think of like right place, right time, right people. So you wouldn't necessarily be like a year out from your trauma that just happened and be sharing it on stages across the world that maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's friends,
Yes,
maybe it's a okay, maybe once you've resolved some of the anxiety or panic from it or heartbreak from it, then you could share on podcasts. But I do think that there
absolutely.
is power in some of our stories and really like I've learned this is just for me, like this can go for anybody however they want, but for me the vulnerability comes in how it felt, not in how the details are. So I don't need to dig deep into, well, here is how I was, sexually abused, emotionally abused, physically abused, or spiritually abused, in depth, all of it. Like I could give an
Correct.
example and just be like, look, we know what sexual abuse is, we know what physical abuse is, I don't need to dig into those two things. But one of the surprising things was the emotional abuse. I didn't know I was being manipulated this way or gaslit this way, and this is what that means, and I
Yes,
never felt I could get out of that. That's such a different way for me to pose it versus I have felt forced sometimes to dig into the abuse details in detail, like, and then what age were you and what did he say to you? And then that to me, that I'm like, oh no, I don't need to relive that for your glory of your podcast
absolutely.
or your event. Like you know what that could be. And I feel like there are some people we have to be careful of, some timing that we have to be careful of. Like I would not go and share my story in the middle of a panic episode. I might be like, today I'm not actually doing real well, so I want to get to
Right.
the meat of this, but I don't want to trigger myself today, you know have my therapist on speed dial on those days, things like that to do that. But I think that there's also right places, like you were saying, is that there's some places where it's not a good idea to go into those details because it maybe it's for your own benefit, or maybe the person listening is like, I would never walk into a foster care room with foster youth and be like, here's all of the nasty details of what I went through,
Absolutely.
because it's going to re-traumatize them. But if it was
Absolutely.
foster parents, like maybe they're coming in for the first time, I would want to be very careful, but share that with them. And I think I always think of this image is like, are you coming into a room of like a china shop? And are you a bull coming into a room with a china shop? Because if you're a bull, you're just making a mess. And then you're like, good, that felt
Absolutely.
great for me. But your people there are just like, what just happened? That was a lot. So it's like we want, like, it is good, I think, to end on that triumph of like, hey, I want you to understand this so you understand where I am. And that is because we want people to see that they can get there too. And that's
Absolutely.
where, the right time, the right place, the right people, they're going to hear that message and be inspired by it. And maybe they do have to work through some emotions. You can't protect everybody, but what you can do is not try to create issues.
Correct.
And
I'm part of a group, and there was a woman on this group, and she started a podcast, and
mhm.
she started a podcast on divorce when she still has a 15-year-old daughter that's still struggling with it. And everybody's like, "Oh, great dad." And
Yeah.
I'm going, that is the worst thing that you could be doing. She's still trying to find herself. And, a 15-year-old girl a lot of times doesn't like their mother, has nothing to do with, and you're sitting here talking about those things, and you think that you are allowed to do that when there's timing issues. No, I
Yeah.
think stuff
Yeah.
like that is something you wait until you don't impact your child so much right now. You're 15. That means your child is still under your care. So why
Right.
would you be talking about all of the dirtiness of a divorce
Yeah.
and wait till they're older, wait till
Yeah.
they've gone through
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, I think that sometimes people,
Age appropriate.
yeah,
Because
that it
there,
needs to be
when
age appropriate.
you're doing a podcast, for most people, they we all watch podcasts, and most of us do it from our home, and our kids are in earshot. And if you are going into those details, it is that thing. Like, even with my daughter, even though she's never experienced the abuse that I did, I don't want to expose her to those things at such a young age, that it's kind of like I want to have these conversations when she's not present. Because
Right.
to me, like, she's 2 right now, but if she hears what, the word sexual abuse at 5, I'm going to have to explain what that is, age appropriate, but still
Yep.
she might have more questions. And that's
Absolutely.
something that it is. I think that that's where it comes down to. This person might be looking to be validated, where it's just like, I'm not alone, and I didn't face this by myself, and other people are out there like me. And I think that's where we walk a very dangerous line if we're not watching the intentions of what it is, not how people
Absolutely.
perceive it, but just like, maybe her daughter's totally fine, but she's saying her daughter's not. And that is a concern for me, is like, even ourselves, like, if we're not okay and we're trying to just fake it and be like, no, I'm fine,
Yep.
I can talk about this. And it's like, hey, if this is impacting you, you don't have to go where you don't have to go. If you don't want to go there with your story, don't go there with your story. Some people are very
Right.
comfortable with sharing the details of their story, and that's on you. Like, you need to decide what's right for you, right time, right place, right people. But I think really asking that question of like, am I just looking to have someone look at me and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for what you went through to get that endorphin rush, or
Mhm.
dopamine rush," or am I sharing because I want it to make a difference for somebody else? Like, that really, I think, comes down to the two questions that I'd ask there. And then the other thing you said is, we will mess up as parents, and you have 6 different stories that come from your home. That has to be hard. So, what it for parents out there, because I think sometimes we are leading with our trauma to try to be like, I have to give them the
Mhm.
perfect childhood. What advice would you give to us as a parent to a parent?
Give yourself grace.
Mm, yeah.
You don't have to have it all perfect, and you're not going to.
Yeah.
And and we always say, I'm a nana of 13 grandchildren, and we always
Hmm.
tell the younger generation. I always tell my children, my daughter loves and stuff like that, enjoy the moment. Do you know not too many mothers that have 4 babies, all underfoot, and they're 2 years old, and they're getting through all the closets and the cupboards, and destroying your house, coloring on your walls, cutting their hair. We you you joy the moment when you're out of that stage.
Mm,
For us as grandparents, we always say, "Oh, hold them a little longer." You're not going to, and sometimes that really is like, I've realized as a nana, sometimes it's not a great advice to give to my daughter-in-laws that have
yeah.
4 children under the age of 5 years old, and she's just trying to breathe and go to the bathroom by herself.
Yeah.
There's seasons of life, and there's seasons of life for a reason.
Hmm.
Enjoy those seasons, but don't like make yourself have to stay in a season longer than it's supposed to happen. You're just going through life, and you're not going to know the finish until your children are laying in bed with their spouses and they're sitting there talking about how their childhood was.
Yeah.
Then you're like, we just live the life. And I wish that we would just do that and give grace. The greatest thing, I was a single mom. I was 22 years old and had 4 children under the age of 5 years old.
Wow.
I had homeschooled. We were homesteaders, so to speak. So I was canning and putting up 500 quarts of stuff. I had been burned by a pressure canner, like all this stuff. We had moved like 13 times in 8 years. And I'm trying to be perfect. And one of my sons said to me just recently when he read my book and we sat together, and he said, Mom, I just realized a whole lot of your trauma and a whole lot of stuff that happened to you was just before you turned 30. Like you had a packed full trauma that had happened to you and you had no grace for it.
Right.
People didn't look at me as a 22-year-old. They looked at me as a mother of 4. I better get my crap together.
Yeah, there was no grace. There was no time for grace is what I'm hearing. And
there was
that's
no
where your
time
kid's
for it.
like, hey, dude.
There was
hey, dude,
no
time for it. Grace would have been great.
We had salmonella that I had ended up in the hospital for 9 days and they couldn't figure out what in the world was wrong with me.
Yeah.
And they finally asked me, were you around cats? And I said, yeah, we moved into a farmhouse that I had to redo. And they had 22 cats and 2 dogs living in that farmhouse. And I was cleaning it. So I ended up getting salmonella. And I had 3 children in diapers. Well, when you have 3 children in diapers, it is an assembly line. You're just changing a diaper, then changing another and changing another.
Yeah.
But they want you to change a diaper, go scrub your hands, then come back, change another diaper, go scrub your hand. I didn't have time for that. So we had salmonella at our house for longer than we probably should have, but because it was so much that was going on.
You were in survival mode. And there's this saying that says I forget who it's by. It's a doctor that says it, but he says you cannot grow and survive at the same time, basically, is what he's saying. And you cannot do well and survive. You can try, but it's just not going to be as much as you'll look back and be like, I would have done all of these things that are so different. And it I really do love that, is where it's give yourself grace. If you have, especially moms with, multiple under 3, 5 years old or 10 years old, it's a lot. It's hard. It's not easy when you work in addition to that, or
Absolutely.
You struggle financially in addition to that. You got to give yourself grace. And that, I think, is, it's wild. And to think so much of stuff, you had so much trauma from 30, in your 20s to 30s. It's just that thing where you go, oh, dang, I wish someone would have looked at me during those 20 to 30s and said, hey, Bambi, give yourself grace, because there is a lot going on. And so this is where I take this from you, is we need to start telling each other that hey, you got a lot on your plate and you got to give yourself grace. Ask yourself, are you giving the best you can today? What is your 40%? Then you gave 40%, and guess what? You're still giving 100% for that day. And that I think would change generations of, we're not dismissing not giving our best. Are we actually trying? Yeah, then that's all we can do. But I think so many times we do live out of our trauma to say, well, we're not going to make any mistakes like our parents. It's that's not true. We just will, but we're not going to do it to the extent of what our parent did.
Right.
And that's what we're not going to abuse. We're not going to abandon. We're not going to have foster care. Those are the things we're not going to do. But we are going to make mistakes, like accidentally giving our kids salmonella and not realizing you could do that from cats. That was not intentional that you did that. Right. But then it's okay, it did happen. Okay, where's the grace?
Yes.
And just feel let's ask that question today. How am I going to give myself grace today? Because I'm not going to let it be like what I was raised in, but Absolutely. I'm going to make mistakes here. And if my kids can see that I tried, they're not going to be like, oh, you were trying to be perfect all the time. They would just be like, Mom did a phenomenal job with what she had. She was a single mom of 6 kids. And I'm hoping that that's what your kids see now. And especially if they're able to read your story and be like, oh, okay, I understand why she did it this way. Was that great? No. But that's okay too. Like, that's
Absolutely.
okay. Do you have anything else you would like to add before we end?
No, I just want, just enjoy the journey. We only get to do
Yeah,
this once. That's it.
that's so
We
true.
don't get other chances. And this very moment, we're not living again.
Right.
You're not
No.
living this moment again. Oh, see, this
Yeah.
moment you're not living again.
Yeah.
Nope, this one you're not.
It's the same
We're
moment,
not
Bambi. I'm
living
just
these
kidding.
moments again. So let's enjoy it. Let's embrace it.
Yeah.
Let's find the good in it.
Yeah.
And you know what? And if you have to fall on your ass sometimes, it's okay. Just get back up and do better.
This is where you get to roll to your knees and then on your feet and then get back up. Like sometimes you have to sit there for a
Exactly.
minute. And I think it's so funny. Just sit there and if you need to just sit there for a second, sit there for a second. Because
Absolutely.
that's what's needed sometimes is that I'm in a season where I pulled back from some things pulling me in a different direction. And I was telling my husband, I was like, I just feel so tired. And he's like, yeah, because it's not the last 6 months that you've been running on this. It's the last 4 years. And you've been running and
Exactly.
running. And before that, you were running and running on running. And so I used to beat myself up emotionally saying like, oh, you're having anxiety. Oh, you're having panic. You're backtracking. And it's like, no, we're not backtracking. Our body is saying, hey, today in this moment right now, I need to rest.
Yes.
And so I'm sitting on my butt and I'm saying, you know what? That doesn't make me weak, doesn't make me less successful. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. It just means that my body
Absolutely.
needs a moment to breathe. So grace upon grace upon
Yes.
grace and take the moment to breathe. Is there anything else
Absolutely.
you would like to
And
add?
find your friends that will teach you to laugh till your stomach hurts and you pee your pants. That's
All right,
that
friends,
is
line up.
true friendship. When you laugh until, my friends, like I'll tell a joke like, on the phone and stuff like
Right.
that, and I'll be typing and I'll be laughing my butt off.
Yeah.
And my friends will text back going, Bambi, I can hear you laughing. We're not even talking, but they can hear me laughing. And
I love
find
that.
those friends that watch you, that watch you fall out of the plane and laugh their asses off at you because you're rolling around trying to get back up. Find those friends that you have to wear Depends with.
Friends, if you're not making people pee their pants from laughter, you're doing it
Right.
wrong. That is what I'm
Exactly.
hearing. Thank you so much, Bambi. This was such an encouraging conversation, and I think really some things that I learned is that like if I am going to share my story, don't do it for validation of the oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, woe is you, woe is me conversation, but to help change somebody else's life and help them be vulnerable. Give grace upon grace. With whatever season you're at, and try to find the moments that you can sit back, laugh, and pee your pants because that's literally what we need. I think that that's the summary of this show.
That's the summary.
I'm gonna go change my pants now. No, just kidding. All right, Bambi. Thank you so much, you guys. Go ahead and follow. Please follow along with Bambi as well. We'll be putting some things in the description of the podcast. You guys can follow along, and if you're looking for a speaker, Bambi would be great to bring in. Read her stories and ask all the questions. You guys have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.